I think that's the fight. I think that is the word and the principle and the concept and the argument and a meaningful part of the solution that provides a sufficiently meaningful and deep theme to hold together a movement that might in fact make democracy work. I think that's the fight. I think that is what is at stake. While there was a handshake and platitudes uttered that I root for peace, I root that they will do something in North Korea, democracy was under attack in the United States. And I'm not saying that to overstate. I'm not saying that for clickbait. I'm saying that because that's, I think, the only way I can understand it. The Supreme Court made a decision so that voters who weren't all that active, who hadn't voted in 3 straight, well, maybe even 1 or 2 presidential races, could be kicked off the rolls. And that even if the motivation were such a thing, were for partisan advantage, that it's okay as long as it seems as a matter of course. The person in the country who has probably done more writing on this topic to help build the rhetorical architecture and the story and the understanding about the battle for democracy is Ari Berman. You've seen him on TV, you've read his stuff in The Nation, you've read his stuff in Mother Jones, and now you're going to hear him here. Ari Berman, break down again what the Supreme Court decision made quickly. We talked about it half an hour ago a little bit, that the of allowing the state of Ohio to purge voters. But I also then want to ask you, what is at stake? What principles are in this opinion that are going to matter for future decisions that governors, legislatures, right-wing operatives, anti-democracy operatives are up to?
So what the Supreme Court was considering was whether you could purge infrequent voters from the rolls. So the way it worked in Ohio was that if you missed an election, they sent you a mailer that basically asked you to confirm your registration. If you didn't respond to that mailer and you didn't vote for 2 more elections, you were then removed from the voter rolls without any notice. So one of the key plaintiffs in the case was a guy who voted in 2008, didn't vote for a few more elections, and then showed up to vote in 2015 for a local referendum and found that he was no longer on the voter rolls, even though he hadn't moved or done anything else that would have rendered him ineligible to vote. And so the worrisome thing here is that this is basically making the vote a use it or lose it right. And if for some reason, any number of reasons, you decide not to vote in a few elections, you then might not be able to vote in future elections, which is really not how we think of voting in this country. And so I think there's sort of a technical issue over, infrequent voters and how they get purged from the rolls, but there's a much larger issue over how we think about the right to vote. And I think my big concern here is that this is going to just open the door to much larger voter purging by states, because Ohio was a state that had purged 2 million people from the rolls, more than any other state since 2011. And one study found that African-American voters in the 3 largest counties in the state were purged at twice the rate of whites. And so this wasn't just the purging of infrequent voters. People were purged for other reasons as well. And I think we've already seen Republican officials around the country say that they're going to use this decision as an excuse to try to do more aggressive voter purging.
Which has been one of the big moves. I mean, one of the things that Thom has been talking about is democracy in chains, is the move by large property since Brown versus Board of Education, since even back to the Civil War, to try to sort of a Southern strategy. And I don't mean that in the Nixon way. I don't mean like trying to get Southerners to vote for you. I mean the South trying to figure out how it could make non-majoritarian policies enacted in a place that has people voting for things. And you have to shape not only the districts, you also got to shape who gets a chance to vote. You do it with poll taxes, you do it with purging them out of the elections. 2 million people in Ohio. Ohio, as I recall, is a relatively close state electorally when it comes to presidential races.
It is, absolutely. We've seen so many close races there. And I think the thing that's noteworthy about voter purges was, back in the Jim Crow era when many African Americans were unable to vote, first the thing they did was make it as hard as possible to register to vote. But even if you were able to register, they made it very difficult to stay on the voter registration rolls. So voter purges were one tactic that was used to try to maintain a white supremacy. And if you look at going forward more recently, one of the things that the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, which was passed after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the things that the National Voter Registration Act said was that there have to be some policies in there both to make it easy to register to vote, but also make sure that you're not kicked off the voter rolls, because there was a problem where a lot of states would make you re-register all the time, for example, which is very burdensome. They make it difficult to register in the first place. And if you have a situation like in Ohio, if you're not notified that you're purged from the voter rolls, you're going to show up. You're not going to be on the list, and your vote's not going to count. And you're only going to be able to register for future elections unless your state has same-day registration, which 15 states have, but Ohio does not. And so we're facing a situation here. If Ohio decides to do large-scale voter purging, that could affect a lot of people. And I imagine there are people out there that didn't vote in previous elections but want to vote because of Trump, that have become politically engaged because of Trump. And they're the very people that could be purged from the rolls because they haven't voted previously, or they voted once a long time ago and they didn't vote for a few elections. Now they want to vote because Trump got them politically active, and they could be purged from the voter roll. So I think we used to understand that there had to be some reason why you were purged. You moved, you died, you did something that would make you ineligible. Not voting in and of itself was not thought of as a reason why you suddenly became ineligible to vote.
Yeah, and so as we think about the effort to suppress votes, to limit democracy, which has been a core plank of ALEC, a core plank of really the Virginia School, a core plank of the sort of red wall that has helped prop up and protect this current president and George W. Bush and this current Congress and Newt Gingrich, has been to erode people's access to the ballot. What principles, in this opinion, might be applied not only to purges, but to other efforts? Because there have been federal cases under the National Voter Registration Act and the National Voting Rights Act about voter suppression generally. Once the Supreme Court has written something, people can quote it. Any quotes you're concerned about in this opinion?
Well, I'm just concerned about the fact that the National Voter Registration Act pretty clearly said that people can't be purged for not voting.
Yeah.
And that language
That's enough.
was seemingly ignored. And then there was the bigger picture issue, which Sotomayor pointed out in her dissent, which is that the Supreme Court seemed to ignore the very things that led to the passage of the National Voter Registration Act in the first place, which was widespread voter suppression, wide-scale voter purging. And that's the kind of thing that the law was supposed to protect, and now they're invoking the law to do those very things. So the opinion by Justice Alito itself was very technical. This is a very technical case. But we've already seen in the aftermath of it that Republican officials are trying to exploit this decision for other reasons. For example, Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State of Kansas, who's really the most notorious voter suppression advocate in the country, he is locked in a battle with ACLU over a law that requires proof of citizenship, meaning you have to have a passport, a birth certificate, or naturalization papers with you to be able to register to vote, which is incredibly burdensome. It blocked 1 in 7 people in Kansas from registering to vote, which is just an enormous number of people who are disenfranchised by this law. The courts blocked the law, and Kobach is now in a federal trial over it. And Kobach just said that now, because of this Ohio opinion, I have the power to enforce this law because the courts can't restrict my right to make it harder for people to register under the National Voter Registration Act. So what Kobach is saying is that even though these are two separate issues, one is about purging infrequent voters, one is about requiring
so you can use the opinion for the other. Ari Berman,
Exactly.
thank you so much for joining us. We're going to break. Thank you for the work you do. It's critical if we're going to have a democracy.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jeff. We'll be back.